Right. Well, good morning, all, and welcome to the International Expo for 2018. Originally, this session was going to be given by Sarah Prowse, who's the chief exec of Hotter. But she decided to do a bit of upward delegation, take herself off to St. Lucia for the week, and suggested that her chairman like to do it in her stead. When I asked for the slides and the notes, she said, "Oh, I hadn't quite got that far as yet." So you're getting what I want to say as opposed to what she might want to say. Just in terms of my background in retail, I spent most of my life with M. Brown Group, so about 25 years in total, partly as FD, partly as chief exec, and that has brands like JD Williams, Simply Be, Giacomo, Fig Leaves, and a host of others. I had a 3-year sabbatical with Shop Direct in the middle. And then I've done a few non-exec things with those companies. And my current life is as chairman of Hotter Shoes, chairman of Roxor Group, which is a bathroom manufacturer and distributor. But interestingly, in the way that the online world is going, it's still the case for them that more than half their sales go through to online retailers. And then Frugo is an international marketplace, and really what I'm planning to do today is really sort of talk through the strategies at Hotter and Frugo. So just by way of a starting point, and just to sort of get you going on this Wednesday morning, perhaps you'd like to actually sort of shout out the brands as I point to them. Bit louder, please. Guinness, yes. Where I was last night, the Hilton. Yeah, and right. Now, isn't that the aim for all of us, to actually build a global brand which is recognised by a tiny little logo? Really what I'm hoping to do in my presentation is perhaps give you just one or two pointers in terms of that. This is actually sort of quite a busy slide, but it doesn't really matter about the names down the side. This is the relative performance of businesses over the Q4 trading period, and the real point here is you can see there's a massive polarization between the winners and the losers, and the key attributes of the winners is that they were A, online, and B, had quite a significant international presence. So that appears to be increasingly be the case, that those are the two winners. Now, in terms of if we actually sort of look at what's actually sort of happening with international growth, then there's no two ways about it. If you look at relative growth rates, stores is going to be at the bottom of the food chain. Online is going to be above that. Mobile is going to be above that. Cross-border is going to be above that. And quite interestingly, the predictions are that manufacturer cross-border is actually sort of going to be more. So, is this the manufacturers starting to say, well, actually on our cross-border sales, we can perhaps cut the retailers out? But whichever you actually look at it, it's all suggesting that international is where the highest growth rates are actually going to be. A market size, you're talking about sort of annual growth at roughly 30%, and a market size in terms of those international sales of over $1 trillion. And where's that growth going to come from? Well, as a share of all that growth, more than half of it's going to come in Asia. Growth everywhere else, but particularly in Asia. So again, does your business have a strategy that's going to help you get a share of that cake, because that's the biggest one? So what I'm actually going to do today, as I say, is just chat you through a couple of case studies. Hotter in terms of how it focused on developing its US business, and Frugo, which is a business which is trying to enable cross-border for all retailers. So if we start with Hotter, Hotter is the UK's largest footwear manufacturer. We make about 2 million pairs of shoes a year up in our factory in Skelmersdale. It is a comfort brand, and our core customer would be, we'd love to say 50 plus, but in truth is 60 plus, and very many in the 70 and 80 plus. So most of our sales at the moment are in the UK domestic market. We're about 50-50 between retail stores and direct to consumer. We also have quite an active wholesale business, which has always been quite a significant international element to it. And we actually launched the direct to consumer into US, Germany and Europe so far. So our strategy, the simplest thing is to say that our strategy is to sell more shoes. In terms of how that builds into the various parts of it, we've got 6 elements to the overall strategy, if I counted the numbers right. But the one I want to talk to you today about is this one here, the Go Global. So why have a global strategy? Well, I think, as I'll demonstrate with the footwear market shortly, the global opportunity is enormous. That can therefore help us drive the growth, economies of scale, and reduces the dependence on the domestic market. I think everyone will know that the UK, and I'd probably say the EU, is not going to actually sort of see much growth in retail sales. And I think, as we saw with some of the stats that have been out even this week, clothing and footwear is may even struggle to actually get to positive like-for-likes across the entire spectrum. One of the reasons for global strategy is because you can. I mean, it's never actually been easier to actually sort of get into international retailing. Although I will actually sort of point out that there are plenty of pitfalls and challenges as well. We counter the seasonal fluctuations. So obviously, different parts of the world have their springs, summers, winters, and autumns at different times, and some individual countries have all 4 of those at the same time. We believe it increases innovation. I mean, I think retailers have always taken inspiration from ideas they've seen sort of across the globe, but we definitely believe we can get something from that. And Hotter already has a global presence that we can build on. So we already ship to over 100 countries from our existing website. So that actually sort of gives us some inkling of where the demand is from around the globe. So if there was ever a time to grow internationally, we believe it's now. I've already mentioned about the trials and tribulations of the UK market, and we believe that the brands that have the ambition to explore the new markets will be the ones that can win. Now, I spoke to Vicky Betts, who's the marketing director at Hotter, and actually say, okay, so if we have this ambition to actually sort of build a global brand, what do you see as the key attributes of a global brand? And perhaps think back to that sort of opening chart that was there. So she came up with these 5 aspects in terms of the importance of the global brand. So just making sure you've actually got that clarity, the focus, the consistency, because as customers travel the globe, they expect to actually see all of those. At the end of the day, you're only actually going to win if you've got something better than your competitors. But I think particularly in the international markets, you've actually got to make sure that your offering is one which is relevant to that consumer, and all of those fed by great insight into both the market and the customers. So in terms of strategic factors, this is true whether you're talking about the domestic market or the international market. There are some things you can control, and there's some things that you can't. So you can choose where you either locate your stores or where you actually sort of do your marketing communications. You can control the actual sort of product range, and you can control the pricing and the margin of that product. Whichever market you're in, the consumers are the consumers, and they'll do whatever they want to do. Obviously, the competition varies very significantly from market to market, as do seasonality and the economic conditions. And I think if I take an example of one of the challenges that you'll actually sort of get, nothing has probably illustrated it more clearly than the serious fluctuations we've seen in the foreign exchange markets in the post-Brexit scenario, where suddenly you can actually sort of be in a situation where your input prices can be 15 to 20% higher than they were a year before. On the other hand, if you've actually got some international sales, those are translating into revenues that are 15 to 20% higher than they were a year before. So that's just one of the many complexities to be managed. So we talked about looking at your market from a global perspective. So if we actually look at the footwear market, when we're analysing, we're looking about an overall market of about 300 billion, sort of forecast to grow at about 3%. The UK is only sort of 10 billion of that. In fact, I think that should be dollars rather than pounds up there. But you're really looking at a situation where maybe the UK as a whole is only 3% of the global footwear market. So why can't we have a go at some of those other markets? Was our logic. I mentioned that sort of Hotter sort of targets the older consumer. So if we're actually looking to say, well, are there many 50-odd-year-olds out there and 60-odd-year-olds? Well, the answer is there's an awful lot of them. So 35% of the world's population is over 50. So if we look at those in terms of different scales, it just gives you a degree of measure of what we've can tackle in the UK versus what's over there. But it's a hell of a lot of feet, so an awful lot of opportunities for the business. So after a lot of research, we decided that we would actually sort of put our efforts really behind trying to actually sort of grow in the US market, and we've actually sort of got to a business at the moment which is about sort of $25 million in the US. I've already mentioned the scale about that. But there is a need to be focused. By definition, it'd be great to say that the US was a homogenous market whereby the West Coast, the East Coast, and the Midwest all actually sort of behave the same, but they don't. So this was our strategy when we were actually sort of putting tackling the US together. Is we actually wanted to make the US market a very significant part of the Hodder business and actually sort of try and get the same share of the US market as we actually had in the UK market. So 3 phases to that. So up to 2017 is what I call sort of stabilize and optimize, which, as you'll see later, really means that we were trying lots of things and trying to find out what worked and what didn't work. 2018, we feel we are now in the situation where we can put our foot down, and then from 2018 onwards, very much about step change growth. And one of the things I didn't mention is that Hodder is majority owned by Electra, which is sort of a quoted sort of private equity business. They're really interested in growth businesses and particularly the international dimension. So we are getting sort of great encouragement and financial support to actually say we think this is what the business should really go for. So where have we actually sort of got to today? So, well, we've had over 1 million orders in the US so far. We've now got over 500,000 customers on the database. Sales last year were 33% and growing. And through this trial and error, we've now got a much improved customer service and marketing strategy. In terms of how we've actually sort of got to those numbers, well, we started off in a very, very traditional way by just by sending some of our existing marketing literature translated into in language and currency and sent to targeted mailing lists over in the US. So all done from the UK. No real need to actually sort of have any significant sort of presence in the UK, and that was just a low-cost way of actually saying, you know, does it look like we can do something in that market? And we've continued to actually sort of do that as we've actually sort of gone on. Obviously, as we've built up the database, we can actually sort of do the CRM and the targeted mailing. So we're looking at not just recruitment, but reactivation and building up sort of sales per customer as well. Obviously, we've actually got HotterUSA.com to actually sort of back that up, and again, we're using that as a reactivation and a recruitment and retention tool as well. So we've now built the online strategy alongside the offline strategy. So in terms of where we're actually sort of going from here, we've now actually sort of got the base, but you've always got to be continually sort of reevaluating the strategy. Some things work, some things don't. But now we are sort of ready to actually sort of go for sort of a big push. So looking at saying, can we get the sort of the business? So you know, Hodder as a whole sort of turns over about 100 million pounds. Can we actually get that level of turnover out of the US market as well? So that means looking at all of those different aspects of it, and whereas in the early days we just ran things on the back of the UK model, you know, we're increasingly having to actually sort of look at the localization in terms of what do we actually need for the US market. So as it happens, Americans on average have slightly narrower feet than we actually have in the UK. So do we actually sort of need to actually change some of the actual sort of product dimensions? So whereas we offer extra wide, do we actually need to offer something that is a bit narrower? So you know, how much would that cost us to actually add into the product range, and then how much extra sales that we're actually sort of going to get. So all of those aspects there. And then needless to say, whilst the US might be seen as one country, in truth, because they've got different taxation systems in almost every one of the states and different different rules on when you do and don't pay sales tax and so on. There's a whole raft of things which actually have to be actually sort of looked at on a state-by-state basis as well as a country. So I mentioned there's been sort of ups and downs in terms of the way we've actually sort of built the Hotter US brand, and I think the yellow line, which is the number of orders, probably is a perfect illustration. It would be lovely to say that it was actually a very nice, smooth transition from start to finish. I think we're very proud that from 2010 we've managed to build a $25 million dollar base there. But there's no two ways about it. Those flatlinings were never, by and large, planned. It was things where, right, we think we've actually now got a marketing strategy that works. Let's do more of it, and then suddenly the next season it doesn't work, and you're scratching your head as to why that's the case. And really, all I can actually say to those of you that are sort of embarking on this journey is you just have to be sort of not dispirited, but to actually sort of analyse that data, sort of come back and work out what's actually going to take it through. And then just finally, obviously one of the difficulties is every business has its own culture. Very, very easy for us in Skelmersdale to actually have our very particular culture. We've actually got the factory, the warehouse, and all the offices all on one site. But can we actually use all of those culture attributes? Can we maintain those as we go onto the international platform? So that really was a case study where somebody's actually focusing very clearly on one particular market and building their brand in this market. But what if you haven't actually got all the resource to be able to actually sort of do that? What if you're a smaller business just wanting to recognize that there's lots of opportunities out there, but how do you actually sort of get at it? So a business that I invested in as I was sort of retiring from M. Brown, and then did some mentoring, and then I've gone on the board, is a business called Frugo. In the program, it's got it with 2 G's, but trust me, it's got 2 U's and 1 G. And the aim for Frugo is to enable customers of any shape or size to actually sort of trade across a very large number of international companies. So if we just talk about sort of online marketplaces, it's not new news, but marketplaces are going to really sort of dominate the online marketplace, the online world, whether you're looking at domestically or internationally. So the expectation that if they've not already through the $1 trillion mark, that they very soon will be, and that the share of online sales through marketplaces will be something like 39% of all online sales by 2020. Why do the marketplaces do so well? When it actually comes down to it, fantastic selection, very, very convenient because they can invest in the logistics, and inevitably they're pretty keen on the price. From a retail perspective, I know from an individual retailer's point of view, would I have preferred not to be on these marketplaces because you're paying quite significant commissions away at times? Then yes, but then that actually says, can you actually build your own business up strongly enough without the marketplaces? So undoubtedly opportunity and threat. So what is Frugo? Well, we think Frugo is relatively unique because it was designed as a global marketplace. So it is one platform which is localized in 33 countries at the moment. We've got new countries coming on all the time. We're working with over 600 retailers worldwide. We have currently sort of 15 million SKUs ready for shoppers to buy. And obviously, I know 15 million is a grain of sand relative to the Amazon marketplace as a whole. But there are some quite significant differentiations. And the key one being is from a retail perspective, from a retailer's perspective, should I say, you feed your product on in one language and one currency, and then that is then available in 33 countries with the customer seeing it in their language and their currency. The retailer doesn't take any of the forex or translation risk. Don't need bank accounts in the countries, in any of the countries. So the Frugo platform does all of that. So far over 1 million customers, very high Trustpilot scores, and our average revenue growth over the last 3 years is 141%. So these are the countries that we currently operate in, which if you take a map of the globe, and anything that's in white is part of the Frugo network. These are the languages that we operate in, and again, the Frugo platform does all of the translation. And ditto with the currencies. As I say, the retailer is always loading in their currency, being paid in their currency, and the Frugo platform does everything else in between. In terms of how Frugo sort of came to be, Risto on the left-hand side is the current chairman of Nokia, and a man with a very complicated name is on the right-hand side is was the ex-chairman of Nokia, and they made literally sort of Risto was the first, I think, tech billionaire in Finland. And when he came out of working at Nokia originally, he was actually looking to see what are the next big things. And the next big things he hit upon was marketplaces and cross-border. But because he was already a billionaire, he didn't want a little business, he wanted a very big business. So the numbers are slightly apocryphal, but whether it was 40, 45 or 70 million euros that they spent building the platform, it was an enormous investment. However, when Risto was asked to go back into Nokia when it had fallen off its perch and Apple and Samsung were now winning the mobile phone handset market, he sold the IP in Frugo to one of the early marketplace pioneers in the UK, a guy called Dominic Allenby, who's actually sort of based up in the Lake District. So the business is from a technical perspective, everything, all the development still largely done in Helsinki, and to actually sort of fund the business, because the whole issue was we've now actually got this platform. At that stage, not a single transaction had gone through it. But of course, because you've got to deal with customers in multiple countries and retailers in multiple countries, it needed quite a bit of funding. So the headline is always for Stuart Rose, put some money into it. But in truth, we've actually sort of got it's virtually all funded by chief execs and chairmen from the retail sector who can actually sort of recognise the value of the Frugo platform. So there's no institutional funding in there at the moment. So there is a bit of a who's who on the shareholder list from the old generation of retailers, I'll probably say. So in terms of what it is we're actually sort of trying to do with Frugo is it's not just about translating from one language to another. It's actually trying to give the customers in every country the localization feeling. So if you actually sort of take this as being the typical sales funnel, finishing up with the transaction, But the most important thing is that we actually need to have that transaction in each of those countries feeling like it should feel for those countries. So again, recognizing that the way people will look at it in the Middle East or Australia or even places quite close like the Netherlands and so on may be different than the way we'd see it in the UK. So there were a lot of sort of comings and goings in terms of where the way we actually sort of designed the website and the actual sort of functionality. In the early days, you try and do something that's all fancy, but ultimately the customer decides what's the best way for that. So we think we've actually been very sort of practical and pragmatic in terms of the way we've designed things. And probably the best example of that is the actual sort of checkout. So checkouts like football referees, the best ones actually go unnoticed, unless Jose Mourinho's around, of course. So we actually have a very sort of simple checkout. No need for the customers to compulsory register. But again, it needs to be able to take account of the fact that what we might see in the UK is a relatively small number of payment methods. That around the world there are lots of different payment methods, and the Frugo platform caters for all of them. So in terms of the way we are building Frugo. What we actually need is we need more retailers on the platform and more customers buying from those retailers. So in terms of acquiring the retailers, we're working with all the people that do the actual sort of data feeds and platforms. Because one of the things I was exhorting the team from the very early days, coming from a business where we always had probably a 2-year IT development log, is if you need the retailer's IT department, you can never offer them enough incremental sales to get high enough up the list. So we have done our absolute level best to make this a plug and play, so that if you are belong to any of these networks, then you just do it with them. And I hesitate to say it's absolutely IT independent, but it is absolutely IT minimized. And then in terms of getting the shopper traffic, well, undoubtedly the big daddy is Google Shopping. So wherever Google Shopping exists, Frugo exists. But Google does not have a monopoly or even a dominant market share in every market. So we will work with whichever of the partners we actually sort of need to in those local markets to drive the traffic to the retailers. And so if we take the numbers we've seen in the last year, we're seeing an increasingly sort of high conversion rate, 141% increase in revenue, and reductions in abandonment. And that's all because we're still a relatively small and new business, so we are forever making quite significant changes to the Frugo platform to actually sort of make it a better and better experience for both the customers and the retailer. So the right-hand side is the sort of thing that would make any businessman happy. So that's been our growth over the last 4 years. Some stats in terms of what we're actually sort of handling, and perhaps no great surprise in terms of which markets have been strongest for us outside the UK so far. Obviously there are some major opportunities in the likes of India and Japan where Frugo exists but is very small at the moment. So I mentioned about the sort of the level of investment that had gone into the platform. You know, how much of it was spent wisely, and how much of it was could have been done sort of far cheaper is anybody's guess. But it's a very substantial sort of platform. These are the sorts of conversion rates that we're seeing sort of typically, and average order values of, you know, round about €50 so far. But, you know, for example, if we put a T-shirt seller on who's got 1 million different T-shirt designs at sort of $10 a throw, you can still sort of make some quite significant changes to actually that. And the best performing categories so far, pretty broad. But for example, the chief exec of Roxor Group bought a boiler from Poland on Frugo, long before he ever knew me or my involvement with Frugo. The Frugo team insisted that I put this one because this is the advert for all come and join the actual sort of Frugo platform. But it really is a situation whereby you know, the bottom bit is the most. It's no sale, no fee. There are no setup fees, so there are sort of commission and fees when there is a sale. They're certainly at a level, going back to my M. Brown days, that I would happily have paid away on the basis that Frugo is doing the marketing. So the spend with the traffic to actually acquire the traffic is done by Frugo, not by yourself. So it's genuinely a no sale, no fee situation, and therefore I'd say a great way to dip your toe in the water. And then just finally to say we're actually working with the DTI to actually who see this as a great way of retailers being able to do their export. But in truth, we're working with people in the other 32 countries saying, how can you increase your exports as well? So there we are. There's the advert. The advert again. So they'd be delighted if you actually sort of made contact and made my time here worthwhile. So hopefully those are demonstrating sort of two ways in which the businesses I'm involved with have tackled building their brand very specifically in one market. And another business, Frugo, where we can actually sort of help retailers get into those international and cross-border markets. So any reason why not to go international? Well, there's no two ways about it. There are lots and lots of challenges. You know, sometimes it's difficult enough running a business in your domestic market. It truthfully only gets harder when you're dealing with businesses which are remote. But assuming you don't want the easy life, you've got lots of challenges to actually sort of overcome that are there. So it's absolutely not easy, but hopefully I've demonstrated that the opportunity is huge. So just to summarize, highest growth in retail very clearly outside the UK, and I'd say Europe as well. You do need that clear focus. What is it you're actually going to do? A lot of analysis required. There are challenges aplenty. Various options for actually going global. And my advice and exhortation would be go globalize your brand. Thank you.